February 1972. Pomona Raceway, California. A lightweight Chevrolet Vega rolled to the starting line at the NHRA Winter Nationals. Now, understand something, GM never even sold the Vega with a V8 engine. Behind the wheel sat a 41-year-old engineer with no factory support, no sponsor money, and a car he'd just finished building 2 weeks earlier. He'd qualified dead last in the field. 17th place out of 32 cars. A disaster. But what Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins was about to do over the next 48 hours would change professional drag racing forever. He'd invent an entirely new way to win races. Not with bigger engines. Not with more money. But with science. By the end of that year, he'd earned $250,000, making him the highest-paid athlete in America. Yes, you heard that right. A drag racer matched Wilt Chamberlain's salary. And the factory-backed teams? They'd spend the next decade trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Welcome back to Regal Rides. Today we're diving deep into one of drag racing's most fascinating stories, the story of how pure engineering genius beat factory muscle and million-dollar budgets. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins didn't just win races. He fundamentally changed how pro stock cars were built. His innovations, tube chassis construction, dry sump oiling, lightweight engineering principles, are still used in every single pro stock car running today. This isn't a story about a rule violation or a ban. This is something even better. It's the story of how one man's brain became drag racing's most dangerous weapon. If you love drag racing history, technical innovation, and underdog stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We've got more deep dives coming your way every single week. Let's get into it. To understand what Jenkins accomplished, you need to understand where pro stock was in the early 1970s. NHRA created the pro stock class in 1970. The idea? Give the best super stock and modified production racers a professional category where they could actually make a living racing door slammer cars with doors, not top fuel dragsters or funny cars. And in 1970 and 71, one team absolutely dominated. Ronnie Sox and Buddy Martin in their factory-backed Chrysler, Hemi Plymouths, and Dodges. The Sox and Martin team had everything. Factory support from Chrysler. Unlimited R&D budgets. The legendary 426 Hemi engine. 425 horsepower, 426 cubic inches of raw American muscle. They had a fleet of cars, a full crew, and Ronnie Sox was arguably the best driver in the country. Jenkins? He won the first 2 pro stock races ever held in 1970, the Winter Nationals and Gator Nationals, driving a converted 1968 Camaro. He even ran the first 9-second pass in pro stock history, 9.98 at 138.46 miles per hour. But then the Chrysler juggernaut crushed everyone. Sox and Martin won the 1970 championship. They won again in 1971. Jenkins didn't win a single national event in 1971. Not one. Ford and Chevy teams were getting embarrassed. The Hemi was just too powerful, too dominant. Something had to change. But Jenkins wasn't the type to give up. See, most racers tried to beat the Hemi by building bigger, more powerful engines. Jenkins did the opposite. He picked up a calculator, and what he figured out would make the Hemi obsolete almost overnight. William Tyler Jenkins. Born December 22, 1930, in Philadelphia. Grew up in Malvern, Pennsylvania, working on his neighbor's tractor engine as a kid. But here's what made Jenkins different from every other racer. He went to Cornell University to study mechanical engineering. He didn't finish his degree, left after 3 years, but he learned something far more valuable than a diploma. He learned how to think like an engineer. While other racers relied on gut instinct and trial and error, Jenkins used mathematics, physics, thermodynamics. He approached drag racing like it was a scientific problem to be solved, not just a contest of who had the biggest engine. By the early 1960s, Jenkins had already built engines for over 30 cars that set national records. He became nationally famous as the engine builder and tuner for Dave Strickler. Won his first NHRA national event as a driver in 1965. But it was his work with Chevrolet that earned him the nickname Grumpy. Jenkins had zero tolerance for small talk at the racetrack. No idle chatter. No bench racing. While other drivers hung around the pits joking and swapping stories, Jenkins was in his trailer with a stopwatch, a notebook, and a slide rule analyzing data. As the Motorsports Hall of Fame would later say, his continual search for improved performance left little time for idle chatter with his racing colleagues. If you asked Jenkins a stupid question, you'd get the famous, grumpy grunt, and he'd walk away. If you had a smart technical question, he'd talk for hours. That personality, that obsessive focus on performance, is what made him unstoppable. By the end of 1971, Jenkins had a serious problem. The 426 Hemi was unbeatable in its current form. Bigger displacement, more horsepower, factory support, Chrysler had every advantage. Jenkins was running Chevrolet big block engines in his Camaros. 430 cubic inch modified versions of the ZL1 aluminum big block. They made good power, but the cars were heavy. Real heavy. And that's when Jenkins had his revelation. See, in early 1972, NHRA changed the rules. They allowed cars with small block wedge engines to run at lighter minimum weights. It was supposed to level the playing field for Chevy and Ford teams getting crushed by the Hemis. Most racers looked at that rule change and thought, okay, we'll build the biggest small block we can, a 350 or 400 cubic inch engine, and try to make up the difference with less weight. Jenkins looked at that same rule change and thought something different. What if I go smaller? So Jenkins went back to his shop in Malvern, Pennsylvania, locked the doors, and started building. Not a bigger engine. A smarter engine. What he created was so radical, so mathematically perfect, that when he showed up at Pomona in February 1972, people thought he'd lost his mind. A Chevrolet Vega? The worst car GM ever made? With a tiny 331 cubic inch engine? Against 426 Hemis? They laughed. Until the Christmas tree lit up. Here's where Jenkins' Cornell engineering education paid off. He didn't just randomly pick 331 cubic inches. He built 3 test engines and ran them through systematic testing. A 350, a 331, and a 302. The 350 showed no performance advantage over the 331 when both were run at the same weight. Heavier engine, same result. Scratch the 350. The 302 showed promise but had reliability issues during testing. Jenkins never got a clean baseline. Scratch the 302. The 331? That was the Goldilocks engine. Not too big, not too small. Just right. But here's the genius part. Jenkins didn't use a 331 crankshaft. He used a small journal 327 crankshaft with bearing spacers and bored a 327 block .030 inches over. This gave him several key advantages. First, shorter stroke, higher RPM capability. The engine could rev to 9,000 plus RPM, unheard of in pro stock at the time. Second, lighter reciprocating mass. He used 5.82-inch aluminum connecting rods instead of the stock 5.70-inch steel rods. Less rotating weight meant faster acceleration. Third, better rod-to-stroke ratio. This reduced piston side loading and allowed smoother, more reliable high RPM operation. Fourth, he already owned 3 sets of TRW pistons from 350 builds that would accept these longer rods. So the economics worked too. By October 1971, Jenkins tested the 331 in his 69 Camaro and walked away with 525 horsepower. Not bad for a small engine. But he wasn't done. By the time the 1972 season started, he'd refined the combination to produce 580 to 585 horsepower. And remember, that's naturally aspirated, pump gas, with dual 4-barrel carburetors. No nitrous, no turbo, no supercharger. Pure engineering. Now, choosing a 331 small block was brilliant. But putting it in a Chevrolet Vega? That seemed insane. The Vega was GM's economy car disaster. Launched in 1971, it won Motor Trend's Car of the Year, then proceeded to become one of the most unreliable cars ever sold. Aluminum 4-cylinder engines that warped, rusted bodies, electrical problems. GM would eventually recall millions of them. But Jenkins didn't care about any of that. He cared about 3 things. 1. Weight. The Vega body was tiny and light. Under NHRA's new rules, a car with a small block wedge engine could run at 2,150 pounds minimum weight. A Hemi-powered Dodge or Plymouth. 2,350 pounds minimum. That's a 200-pound advantage right out of the gate. 2. Aerodynamics. The Vega's compact shape, low roofline, and small frontal area meant less wind resistance. Jenkins understood that at 140+ miles per hour, aerodynamics mattered as much as horsepower. 3. Weight distribution. The Vega's near 50 to 50 weight distribution and low center of gravity meant better traction off the line. And in drag racing, the first 60 feet determines everything. But here's where Jenkins went truly revolutionary. He built the first pro stock tube chassis. Up until 1972, Pro stock cars used factory unibody construction. You took a production car, gutted the interior, added a roll cage, and that was it. The car still had factory floor pans, factory suspension mounting points, factory everything. Jenkins threw all that away. He acid-dipped the Vega body shell to remove weight, then built a complete tube frame chassis underneath it. This gave him total control over suspension geometry, weight distribution, and chassis stiffness. His team, Jenkins, Dave Trison, Dick Whitman, and Tom Kerr, worked non-stop for 2 months. 1,400 man-hours to complete the build. S&W Race Cars in Spring City, Pennsylvania, built the initial tube frame to Jenkins' specifications. The car featured Jenkins' patented 3-link rear suspension system, custom front suspension geometry, and strategic use of hardening foam in structural cavities for strength without weight. When complete, the Vega looked stock. But underneath? It was a purpose-built race car. January 1972. The Vega was done. But Jenkins had a problem. He'd never driven the car in competition. Never tested it at full race weight. He had dyno numbers in theory, but theory doesn't win races. And in 2 weeks, he'd be racing against the best pro stock drivers in the world at the NHRA Winter Nationals. Time to find out if science could beat muscle. February 6, 1972. NHRA Winter Nationals, Pomona Raceway, California. Jenkins rolled his brand new Vega to the starting line for qualifying. The car was literally 2 weeks old. He'd done some shakedown passes, but nothing serious. First qualifying pass, 9.90 seconds. Disaster. 32 cars entered pro stock. Jenkins qualified 17th. Dead last in the field. The slowest qualifier. The Hemi cars were running mid to low 960s. Sox and Martin's Dodge ran a 962. Bob Lambick's Plymouth ran a 958. Don Grathier's Duster ran a 964. Jenkins was 0.3 slower. In drag racing terms, that's an eternity. People in the pits were laughing. Grumpy finally lost his touch. That little Vega can't compete. He should have stuck with the Camaro. But Jenkins didn't panic. He went back to his trailer, pulled out his notebooks, and started calculating. Tire pressure, suspension settings, weight transfer, launch RPM, shift points, pure mathematics. Sunday morning, eliminations day. Jenkins made adjustments to the front and rear suspension. Subtle changes. A quarter turn here. 2 pounds there. First round of eliminations. Jenkins runs a 968 at 141 miles per hour. He wins. Second round, 964 at 142. He wins again. The car was getting faster with every pass. Not because Jenkins was finding more horsepower, the engine was the same, but because he was optimizing how that power got to the ground. Semifinal, 962 at 143. Jenkins advances to the final. His opponent in the final? Don Grathier in a 426 Hemi-powered Dodge Duster. The same Hemi combination that had dominated pro stock for 2 years. The Christmas tree counted down. Both drivers staged. Green light. Jenkins launched hard. The Vega hooked up perfectly, transferring power through Jenkins' 3-link suspension system. By 60 feet he was already ahead. Grathier's Hemi had more horsepower. But the Vega was lighter, quicker, and Jenkins was shifting perfectly through his manual 4-speed. At the finish line, Jenkins, 962 seconds at 142.15 miles per hour. Grathier, 968 seconds. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins had just won the 1972 NHRA Winter Nationals in the car's first ever national event appearance. And he did it by out-engineering everyone. That Winter Nationals win? It wasn't luck. It was science. And Jenkins was just getting started. 1972 Gator Nationals. Jenkins wins again. U.S. Nationals. Jenkins wins. Super Nationals. Jenkins wins. By the end of the 1972 season, Jenkins won 6 out of 8 NHRA national events. His 331-powered Vega was now consistently running in the mid-950s at 145+ miles per hour. The Hemi teams were stunned. How was a 331 cubic inch engine beating their 426 Hemis? The answer was simple: power-to-weight ratio and Jenkins' relentless optimization. While Hemi cars made more peak horsepower, maybe 625 to 650 horses versus Jenkins' 585, they also weighed 200 pounds more. Jenkins' Vega had a better power-to-weight ratio, launched harder, and Jenkins was manually shifting a 4-speed faster and more consistently than anyone in the sport. In fact, in 1972, Jenkins recorded 250 consecutive passes without missing a single shift. 250 runs. Perfect shifting every time. That's not talent. That's discipline, focus, and engineering precision. And the money? It started pouring in. Event wins, contingency sponsors, manufacturer support. Jenkins earned $250,000 in 1972. To put that in perspective, Wilt Chamberlain, the highest-paid NBA player, made $250,000 that same year. A drag racer matched the salary of the biggest star in professional basketball. The mainstream media noticed. Time magazine did a feature story on Jenkins, the first drag racer to ever receive that level of national coverage. Jenkins had proven his point. Science beat muscle. Engineering beat brute force. But he wasn't satisfied. The 1972 Vega was good. Revolutionary even. But Jenkins was already thinking about what came next. How could he make the car even better? The answer would come 2 years later. And it would change pro stock, and all of drag racing, forever. Jenkins dominated 1972. But 1973 was about refinement. Early in the 73 season, NHRA changed the rules again, this time allowing records to be set at any national meet, not just the U.S. Nationals. At the 1973 Winter Nationals, Jenkins drove his Vega to pro stock's first official speed record, 148.76 miles per hour. His rival Dino Don Nicholson set the ET record that same weekend with a 9.33. But Jenkins wasn't content with records. He was thinking bigger. See, the 1972 Vega, Grumpy's Toy 9, was revolutionary for its time. But it still used some production Vega components. The body was acid-dipped original Vega. The chassis was a tube frame, yes, but it still worked around some factory mounting points. Jenkins wanted to build a pure race car. No compromises. No production parts unless they were the absolute best option. So he went back to the drawing board. 1974. Jenkins unveiled Grumpy's Toy 11. If the 1972 Vega was revolutionary, the 74 model was from another planet. Jenkins threw out everything. Started from scratch. This wasn't a modified street car anymore. This was a purpose-built race machine that happened to look like a Vega. The chassis, full tube frame, no production parts. Lighter, stiffer, stronger. The suspension, Jenkins designed and installed Pro Stock's first McPherson strut front suspension. This gave him precise control over camber, caster, and geometry changes during weight transfer. In the rear, he refined his 3-link setup for even better traction. The oiling system, Pro Stock's first dry sump oiling system. Instead of a traditional oil pan that sloshes oil around during acceleration, the dry sump used external pumps and a separate oil tank. This meant consistent oil pressure at any RPM, any G-force. It also allowed Jenkins to lower the engine in the chassis, improving center of gravity and weight distribution. The rear end, he ditched the GM 12-bolt rear end for a massive Dana 60 unit. The Dana 60 was stronger, required less maintenance, and could handle more power and torque. The transmission, Lenco 4-speed planetary transmission. More reliable than a traditional manual, and faster shifts. The engine, the same 331 small block architecture, but now refined even further. It was producing 680 horsepower and revving to 9,300 revolutions per minute as it crossed the finish line. 680 horsepower from 331 cubic inches. That's 2.05 horsepower per cubic inch. Naturally aspirated. On pump gas. For comparison, modern Pro Stock engines make about 1,400 horsepower from 500 cubic inches, roughly 2.8 horsepower per cubic inch. Jenkins was getting 2.05 in 1974 with 1970s technology. Absolutely insane. And the results? In 1974, Jenkins won 13 Pro Stock national events. 13. Absolutely dominant. The 74 Vega wasn't just the best Pro Stock car of its era. It was one of the most important race cars ever built, period. By 1974, every Pro Stock team in America was trying to figure out how Jenkins was so fast. Hemi teams started building lighter cars. Ford teams experimented with smaller, lighter 351 Cleveland engines. Everyone started copying Jenkins' tube chassis approach. But here's the thing, copying the technology wasn't enough. You also had to understand the engineering principles behind it. Jenkins didn't just build lighter cars. He understood weight transfer, suspension geometry, power curves, gear ratios, tire compound behavior at different temperatures. He approached every single component as an engineering problem with an optimal solution. Most racers built engines by feel. Jenkins built engines with mathematics. And that's why he stayed ahead. Other teams started hiring engineers, started investing in research and development, started taking drag racing seriously as a science, not just a sport. And it was all because of Jenkins. By 1975, Jenkins had proven everything he needed to prove. 13 national event wins, multiple championships, highest paid athlete in America, Time magazine coverage. He'd revolutionized pro stock racing, not once, but twice. But Jenkins wasn't a racer at heart. He was an engineer, a builder. And he was about to make one final move that would cement his legacy forever. In 1976, Jenkins made a decision. He was done driving. Not done racing. Done driving. He hired Larry Lombardo and Ken Dondero to drive his cars while he focused 100% on what he loved most, building engines and developing technology. And guess what? Lombardo won the 1976 NHRA Winston Pro Stock Championship in his very first season driving for Jenkins. Jenkins' engines would go on to power 5 NHRA Pro Stock Championships and 3 HRA Championships. His client list included some of the biggest names in drag racing: Bob Glidden, Warren Johnson, Larry Lombardo, and dozens more. In total, Jenkins built engines 161 NHRA national events across multiple classes. Let's talk about what Jenkins actually invented or pioneered in drag racing. Number 1. Tube chassis construction in pro stock. Jenkins built the first pro stock tube chassis in 1972. Today, every single pro stock car uses a tube chassis. It's not even legal to run a production unibody anymore. Number 2. Dry sump oiling systems. Jenkins introduced this in 1974. Now it's standard in pro stock, pro modified, and even used in many top fuel and funny car applications. Number 3. McPherson strut front suspension. Jenkins pioneered this in pro stock. The geometry advantages are so significant that most modern pro stock cars still use variations of this design. Number 4. Kick-out oil pans. Jenkins designed these to prevent oil starvation during hard acceleration. Now standard across multiple classes. Number 5. Cool cans. Jenkins developed cooling systems to regulate intake air and engine temperatures more precisely. Number 6. Gas-ported pistons. Jenkins worked on piston designs that improved ring seal and combustion efficiency. Number 7. Slick shift manual transmissions. Jenkins refined 4-speed manual transmission technology to the point where he could shift 250 times without a single missed gear. Number 8. Small block dominance philosophy. Before Jenkins, everyone thought bigger is better. Jenkins proved that power-to-weight ratio, aerodynamics, and optimization mattered more than raw displacement. These aren't just drag racing innovations. Some of these technologies filtered into NASCAR, road racing, and even production cars. Jenkins didn't just change pro stock. He changed motorsports engineering. Jenkins' genius wasn't limited to drag racing. In 1975, Donnie Allison used a Jenkins-built engine to win the pole position for the Daytona 500. The Daytona 500, the biggest race in NASCAR. In 1987, Mike Swaim used a Jenkins engine to take the pole for the Busch Series race at Daytona. Jenkins also helped develop GM's new splay valve cylinder heads for Chevrolet small block Vitas. These heads were used in the pro stock truck category starting in 1998. His engines powered Larry Kopp to the 1998 Winston Pro Stock Championship. Even into the 2000s, Jenkins engines were winning. Dave Connolly used a Jenkins power plant to win the 2005 Winter Nationals in Pro Stock Cobalt, briefly taking the points lead. Two-time Pro Stock champion Jim Yates ran a Jenkins engine in his 2005 Pontiac GTO. The man retired as a driver in 1976. And his engines were still winning races 30 years later. That's legacy. By the time Jenkins died in 2012, he'd been inducted into every major motorsports Hall of Fame. He'd been ranked the 8th greatest NHRA driver of all time, ahead of drivers who won more races, more championships. But because Jenkins didn't just win, he changed how winning was done. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins received every major honor in motorsports. 1993, inducted into the Don Garlits International Drag Racing Hall of Fame. 1996, inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. 2001, ranked number 8 on NHRA's Top 50 Drivers of All Time list, a poll of drag racing experts. Only 7 drivers in NHRA history were ranked higher than Jenkins. 2008. Inducted into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame. 1972. American Auto Racing Writers and Broadcasters Association All-America Team. 1984. Chevrolet's Performance Award. 21 times. Selected to CarCraft magazine's All-Star Drag Racing Team, including Man of the Year and the Ali Award. Think about that number 8 ranking. Jenkins won 13 national events as a driver between 1965 and 1975. Guys like Bob Glidden won 85 national events. Warren Johnson won 97. John Force won 157. But Jenkins was ranked number 8 because he fundamentally changed the sport. His innovations, his engineering approach, his influence on every pro stock car built after 1972, that mattered more than win totals. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins continued working on engines and consulting with race teams well into his 70s. He never fully retired. Racing was in his blood. Engineering was who he was. On March 29, 2012, Jenkins died of heart failure at his home in Powley, Pennsylvania. He was 81 years old. The outpouring of tributes was massive. Don, the Snake, Prudhomme called him irreplaceable. Bob Glidden said Jenkins taught him everything he knew about pro stock engines. Warren Johnson called him the smartest man I ever met in racing. NHRA dedicated pages of National Dragster to tributes from his peers, Buddy Martin, Linda Vaughn, Larry Lombardo, Jerry Haas, and dozens more. As for his cars, the 1974 Grumpy's Toy 11, the masterpiece with the dry sump oiling and McPherson struts, sold at auction in 2007 for $550,000. $500,000 for a 1974 Vega. That car is now in a private collection, preserved as one of the most important race cars in American motorsports history. Several other Grumpy's toys are in museums or private collections. The Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing has Jenkins artifacts and memorabilia. His legacy? It's at every single NHRA pro stock race. Every tube chassis. Every dry sump system. Every team using engineering and data analysis instead of gut feel. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins proved that science beats muscle. That brains beat brawn. That a mechanical engineer with a slide rule could become the highest paid athlete in America. And no one's ever forgotten it. So was Bill Jenkins just a great racer? Or was he something more? The answer is clear. He was an engineer who happened to race. And that made all the difference. Let's bring it all together. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins didn't beat the Hemis by being louder or faster or more aggressive. He beat them by being smarter. 3 main takeaways. 1. Engineering beats brute force every single time. Jenkins proved that a 331 cubic inch engine could dominate 426 Hemis if you understood power-to-weight ratios, aerodynamics, and weight transfer. 2. Innovation comes from questioning assumptions. Everyone said you needed the biggest engine possible. Jenkins asked, "What if I don't?" That question changed everything. 3. Discipline and focus matter more than raw talent. Jenkins recorded 250 consecutive passes without a missed shift. That's not luck. That's relentless attention to detail. Jenkins didn't just win races. He permanently altered how pro stock cars are built. Tube chassis, dry sump oiling, McPherson struts, these aren't antiques. They're the foundation of modern pro stock. Every time you watch a pro stock race today, you're watching Bill Jenkins' legacy in action. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The greatest innovations don't come from doing what everyone else is doing, only better. They come from asking different questions entirely. So what do you think? Was Bill Jenkins the greatest pro stock racer ever? Or the greatest racing engineer? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious what you all think about Jenkins' approach. Science and mathematics versus gut instinct and tradition. If you enjoyed this deep dive into drag racing history, make sure you're subscribed to Regal Rides. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. Give this video a thumbs up if you learned something new. And if you've got your own Jenkins stories, maybe you met him at a race or you've worked on one of his engines, share them in the comments. This community loves hearing real stories from the golden age of drag racing. Next week, we're covering another controversial pro stock story, the time NHRA banned a car so fast they literally rewrote the rule book overnight. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next race.